plastic seats! He was flying. He was great. He was just flying around.
Mr. Booze, Mr. Booze, Mr. B-double-O-Z. He don't ever choose any game you play with. If you lose, so mess with Mr. Booze. If your head feels like it's 10 foot wide, you'll feel better once you testify. Testify. Oh, yeah. Testify. Oh, I want to testify.
Superman was bad.
I'll say he was.
I mean, he was bad.
Superman 3 is if like a really solid Superman film was invaded by a terrible Richard Pryor comedy. Superman 2 is my favourite superhero film. I've loved it ever since the age of 12, being tucked into bed one night and watching it in the dark on Channel 5, the awe of the film shining back at me. So I want to make it clear that after the elation I experienced watching Superman 2, for a long time I vehemently despised Superman 3, even to the point of almost throwing tantrums at why it wasn't anything like my beloved Superman 2. I even remember watching the film round at my grandparents' house and ranting uncontrollably when the credits started to roll. My 12-year-old self was practically foaming at the mouth. I'm just glad I wasn't a 12-year-old in 1982/83 learning that Richard Pryor was going to be in the sequel to one of my favourite films ever. It would have fucking gutted me. My opinion has definitely mellowed over the years, and I've grown an appreciation for the Superman stuff in Superman 3. Just like the Man of Steel's personality being split into two in this movie, the film was split into two halves in terms of its quality. Whenever Christopher Reeve was on screen, it was good. Whenever he wasn't, it sucked. I'm accused of being too harsh on the Salkinds. I am aware of the original treatment written by Elias Salkind in 1982, which was a far more ambitious project, featuring a story that crossed multiple dimensions, parallel universes, included time travel, and had a myriad of legacy characters such as Brainiac, Mr. Magitspilk, and Supergirl. I can't fault the treatment on its imagination and creativity, but at the end of the day, it was shit. So I understand why Warner Brothers passed on it. I mean, Superman getting it on with Supergirl? Before we get into Richard Pryor, I want to address what I consider to be the lost potential behind this film. Put simply, I think that Superman 3 should have been the Goldfinger of the Superman franchise. Like Dr. No from Russia with Love, Superman 1 and 2 were smash hits and delivered something special that audiences hadn't seen before in a motion picture. It made them believe a man could fly. The Bond producers did the sensible thing of pushing the envelope as much as possible, which is an approach that captured the imagination of audiences and gave them something they'd never seen before. The Superman franchise really needed to follow this example. As they say, go big or go home. And just like Sean Connery, Christopher Reeve was now the definitive live-action Superman, completely at home in the role in both looks and acting, and with the smash hits of the first two films, the natural momentum seemed to indicate the producers were heading in the direction of making Superman 3 the defining entry in the series. So I find it weird how after the massive epic adventures of Superman 1 and 2, Superman 3 feels suspiciously low-key and low energy. A lot of the time, Superman 3 doesn't even feel like a superhero action adventure. Superman 1 had Superman simultaneously avert an earthquake, a dam break, and a nationwide nuclear catastrophe, and Superman 2 has Superman battle with three other Kryptonians in the skies above Metropolis to stop them from taking over the world. Superman 3 has Superman flailing around on the floor whilst a computer zaps lasers at him. It's like if the Bond producers, after the smash hits of Dr. No from Russia with Love, decided to adapt the short story of 007 in New York as the third entry in the series. An epic tale which told the story of Bond walking around New York searching for the perfect Eggs Benedict recipe, while obviously half the movie would be dedicated to Bob Hope. It's such a strange and counterproductive direction to go in, when the creative decisions made in Superman 2 made the producers almost $200 million at the box office. Why change something that was already working? Richard Pryor should not be in a Superman film in the same way Dave Chappelle doesn't have any business being in The Dark Knight Rises.
I'm here to fight for truth and justice in the American way.
And they don't kill cars. They kill niggas.
In fact, he's only in it because he said on a talk show once that he liked Superman 2, which is probably the most boneheaded and hubristic decision made by the producers of a big-budget franchise in film history.
I think the problem with success is sometimes you get very nervous that you're not going to achieve it in the next version, and so you go to anxious lengths to try to protect the success. And so it seemed like, oh, a guarantee, put Richard Pryor in the movie, and of course the film will be a great success.
You dumb motherfuckers!
In these incongruous circumstances, Pryor was destined to be mishandled, and so he is, as he portrays the bumbling, grating character of Gus Gorman. For some reason, the wry wit Pryor used in his stand-up is exchanged here for either goofy slapstick or groan-worthy sight gags.
Fuck off! Not good enough!
Some of the interminable comedic set pieces are just painful to watch, from the bit in the computer room to the god-awful and cringy interruption of Superman's Smallville Key to the City ceremony, which just goes on forever! It's kind of embarrassing and so low quality, I just don't understand how Richard Lester, the director, couldn't have noticed it. Reeves just looks awkward and embarrassed during these moments, which really should be solely dedicated to him, because, you know, the film's called Superman. The film opens with a highly ill-advised slapstick sequence, which is just horrific. It's not even the penchant of director Richard Lester, who was known for more absurdist humour rather than slapstick.
End of part 1. Intermission. End of intermission. Part 2.
The fantasy tone of the last two films is also diminished, leaving the film feeling less imaginative and more distilled from its comic book origins. And this is reflected prominently in the film's main villain, Ross Webster. I know they couldn't get Gene Hackman back, but I think the filmmakers taking a leaf out of the comics here for this character really would have helped them. Just make Rob Webster the Toy Man, but update the character by having his company sell video games instead of toys. It would have tied into the plot nicely, strengthened the motif of video games in the film, and it would have been a topical subject matter for 1983. When Pryor finally turns to the good side, the most tragic thing of all that I notice is that Christopher Reeve and Richard Pryor actually play off each other quite well in their brief interactions, which is why Richard Pryor, in my opinion, would have been better as an anti-hero. In the comics, Metallo is a criminal, John Corbin, who becomes injured in an accident and gets converted into a cyborg called Metallo by Lex Luthor. So, in Superman 3, you could basically just have, at the end of the first act, Robert Vaughn or the supercomputer or whatever turn him into Metallo. Then have Superman and Metallo battle in the junkyard instead, and in the aftermath of Superman's victory, persuade Metallo to team up with him and take down Ross Webster, the man who turned him into the cyborg in the first place. There. I came up with that in 30 seconds. Lois Lane, the main love interest for the last two films, is suspiciously absent in this installment. She appears in all but 2 scenes, and that definitely has nothing to do with the fact that the Sulkines were angry at her for publicly scolding them for firing Richard Donner before the restarting on production of Superman 2. Not that Margot would have wanted to be in this anyway, out of her loyalty to Richard Donner. Christopher Reeve almost wasn't going to be in Superman 3. Reeve literally refused to be in it unless changes were made to the script, and things got so dire that arrangements were starting to be made for Tony Danza to take over from Reeve as Superman. But Lester wanted Reeve on board, so the screenwriters were forced to get it together and actually write good scenes for Christopher Reeve, whilst Pryor was happy to just take his paycheck and ride through the sputum that were the scenes written for him. Everything in the film concerning Christopher Reeve is actually rather good. After the Bondian globe-trotting antics of Superman 2, Clark going back to his roots in Smallville seems like a solid and sensible direction to go in. Smallville is very cinematic looking and we get some beautiful shots of Superman flying through the wheat fields. The Lana Lang romance is sweet yet a bit underdeveloped. The action sequences are very cleverly staged and well executed. I especially love it when Superman freezes the lake and then drops it onto the burning power plant, and it puts the fires out as it melts in midair. Really inventive stuff, really good. And I'm not realistic, but very cinematic. You know, more cinematic than... Ow, my ears! My ears! Ow! All the Superman action sequences all happen in classic Silver Age locations. The wheat fields of Smallville, a power plant, caves, canyons. We could have even had an action sequence involving Superman stopping a tornado in Colombia, but instead of executing something audiences actually wanted to see, the bizarre decision was made by Richard Lester to have Richard Pryor describe what Superman did in an overlong, painfully unfunny set piece, interspersed with cock-teasing brief shots of the event. This prior improv wasn't in the shooting script. I know, I've read it. And because of this, I have a conspiracy theory here. I think that Richard Pryor's fee was so extortionate that they actually ran out of money to do this tornado sequence, so they had to substitute it with this garbage. The whole situation just isn't good enough, and it just shows how Pryor's presence actually saps away at the film's overall quality, or the quality it could have had. I mean, for fuck's sake, would you rather have or
He was flying. He was great.
Fuck off! Not good enough!
Christopher Reeve is great as evil Superman, and that slow build-up from when he gets exposed to the corrupted kryptonite to when he emerges fully formed is just a really well done performance, and is by far the most compelling stuff in the entire movie, and, not coincidentally, happens to be the longest stretch of the film without any Richard Pryor mugging. The scene in Lana's house when Superman is beginning to turn evil is probably the best written dialogue scene in the film. It's genuinely creepy and unsettling and well shot, with Reeves' glare creepily invading the frame, echoing his invasion of Lana's personal space. In fact, the filmmaking in general is far better in the Reeves scenes than in the Pryor scenes. It's dynamic and considered, rather than in the Pryor scenes where it mostly plays out in bland master shots or static mediums, the camera begging for Pryor to say something even remotely funny, and it almost never happens. And obviously, the classic junkyard fight between Clark Kent and evil Superman. And yeah, the editing could have been a bit tighter in places, but it's cleverly choreographed. And it's not just a punching match, there's actual psychological subtext behind the fight, some of which would have been lost if it had just been a straight comic book faithful fight between Superman and Bizarro. I love the gritty urban environment it takes place in. It's a literal physical reflection of Superman's garbled state of mind at this point, and the psychological undertones give the sequence an ambiguity you don't really see much in superhero movies even to this day. Is this fight actually happening, or is it a symbolic fight for the audience's benefit, of visually representing the turmoil going on inside Kal-El's head? Credit where credit is due, this is Lester and Newman's thinking outside the box, but in this case it works. This 1 10-minute sequence has more structure, highs and lows, and emotional pathos to it than the actual plot of the whole frickin' movie. And when the good Clark Kent prevails in this metaphysical fight, his transformation into Superman is awesome, and he flies off to correct the mistakes of his corrupted self. Great sequence. Well done, David and Leslie. You did good here.
It contains a scene that I think is really interesting. That was an idea that Tom Hanks had, and that's good Superman versus evil Superman fighting out the junkyard.
Wait, what was that, Chris? Wait, can you say that again? Sorry, can you say that again?
That was an idea that Tom Hanks had.
You're telling me that the best part of the movie was stolen from an idea came up by a writer that these guys fired? What?
How do you do that? How stupid can you be?
But most of all, it's funny how in a movie that stars Richard Pryor, the funniest actor in it is Christopher Reeve. Almost all of the jokes in the film that work for me are to do with Clark Kent. I especially love the bit in the bowling alley. This method of telling jokes with Superman's powers is really interesting and unique stuff to this movie, and I wish it was done more often in the film.
Hey, Johnny, whatever you do, I'll buy that. Don't make me sneeze. No.
At this rate, it seems to me the film that Christopher Reeve shot was probably a completely different picture to what Pryor had shot. But Reeve's Superman 3 seems to be a solid and well-written entry into the series, with Reeve getting more creative control in the script and direction of the flying sequences than he ever did before, with the prior Superman 3 completely misfiring by its side and completely falling flat on its face. I can imagine Reeve at the end of the shooting being like, Well, that was a good movie, guys. Well done, Richard. I'll see you around for the next one. Oh. The fact that Christopher Reeve announced before the film had even released that he was done with the role of Superman demonstrates to me how little faith he had in the producers and filmmakers.
Is there going to be a Superman 4?
This is where we get out the violins. No, I've got my diploma now, and they're going to put me out to pasture.
You're hanging up the cape and tights, are you?
Yeah, that's it. Unless maybe there's a part of some 18th century highway robber who also wears the cape and tights, but maybe not the same color turquoise.
And good on him. On a serious note, I really respect the man for doing this. Almost any other actor in his position would have just taken a paycheck and relented to being in this nonsense. But Reeves' artistic integrity was so strong, so he wasn't prepared to go along with anything that compromised the dignity of the Superman character, and basically told the filmmakers, rewrite my parts to not suck, otherwise I'm not doing the movie. He was willing to walk away from the role that made him a movie star and a very rich man, both out of loyalty to Richard Donner and out of protest to the poor material. I think anyone would rate this as highly commendable behaviour. For years I couldn't decipher whether it was Christopher Reeve's portrayal of Superman or the Superman character himself that I was such a fan of. Whenever I tried to read Red Sun or Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, I just got bored of them because I wasn't looking at Christopher Reeve's face. I wasn't hearing his voice. I just think Reeve imbued Superman with a sense of integrity and decency, and just solid moral fortitude that hasn't really been replicated in any other actor since. There's too much of a focus on making these heroes flawed, or having troubles, and I think with Superman that misses the point. Reeve makes Superman an aspirational figure, an ideal figure, to a level of decency and selflessness we can all strive toward as a human race. It's a utopian ideal in some ways. I think even in Superman 3 the filmmakers missed this point, and as a result assumed Superman wasn't a particularly interesting character. I wrote this farcical computer story to provide the slightly cynical social commentary Richard Lester often inflicted into his films. And I guess that would be excusable if the guy that was playing Superman wasn't Christopher Reeve. Reeve made the character interesting for his portrayal. Reeve wasn't playing two characters, he was really playing three characters, and it's a trick a lot of superhero actors nowadays playing similar roles seem to miss. Kal-El is the vessel of how we experience the emotional condition of Superman, having to juggle the responsibility to the human race and himself emotionally through all these different alter egos. And through all this emotional stress, he still manages to maintain his decency and integrity and selflessness as a person. Reeve made Superman a symbol for the good of the human race, just like he did himself on his time on this planet. The 007 stage, dedicated for James Bond productions, was erected in 1977 for The Spy Who Loved Me, and plans are being drawn up for the Superman stage, a massive equivalent stage for the luxury of the Superman films, intended to be erected for the next installment of the Salkind franchise. But, because of the underperformance of Superman 3, and Reeve not coming back, the plans fell through, and out of embarrassment, the Salkind sold the franchise in 1985 to Canon Films, and the B-movie empire sat on the too costly property, which lay dormant for the next 30 years. Oh wait. They didn't.
Fuck off!
Unlike other franchises like Jaws and Predator, the Superman franchise was made for multiple installments, and there was limitless material the Salkinds could have mined from. But because of the creative screw-up of Superman 3, it was stopped in its tracks, and this is one of the biggest but still most interesting tragedies in filmmaking history. Imagine the juggernaut the Salkinds could have had in their hands, the massive money-making spectacle machine that could have been the Christopher Reeve Superman films, and it was squandered just to make a shitty Richard Pryor comedy. What a shame. Despite the watering down of the Superman mythos through the jarring addition of Richard Pryor, however, Christopher Reeve still manages to shine in the role that he defined for generations to come. And in some scenes, he still managed to carry the tone of verisimilitude Donner and Tom Mankiewicz had pioneered in 1978, treading through the mire of the embarrassing and awful Richard Pryor improv. When you get this guy in your movie without a script, it's never going to work, and despite the big paycheck for Pryor, All that Big Boy did for the Soulkinds was to drag their film down from its full potential, and distract from the scenes that were genuinely good. Like I said earlier, it's a film of two halves. One a lackluster Richard Pryor vehicle, the other a solid entry into the Christopher Reeve Superman series. Which side wins out? You decide. My opinion? For Richard Pryor, it was a disaster. For Superman, for Christopher Reeve, it was a good day at the office.
Take care. I'll see you around. So long.
Take it easy, man.